The old clock on the wall showed 11:30 p.m. when Rosa picked up her cleaning cart and wheeled it. Through the heavy oak doors of the Grandview Symphony Hall, the sound of her cart's squeaky wheels echoed through the empty corridors. A familiar sound? That had been part of her routine for the past 15 years. Rosa was not the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked down the street. She was in her early 50s, with graying hair that she always kept tied back in a simple bun. Her hands were rough from years of cleaning, and her uniform was always perfectly pressed, even though it had seen better days. She took pride in her work, even if others didn't notice. The Symphony Hall was a place of magic during the day. Rich people in fancy clothes would fill the red velvet seats, listening to musicians play beautiful music on instruments that cost more than Rosa made in a year. But at night, when everyone went home, it became Rosa's world. She started her shift like she always did, in the lobby. The marble floors were massive, stretching from wall to wall like a frozen lake. Rosa had mopped these floors so many times. She could do it with her eyes closed. But she never got tired of being here. There was something special about this place that made her feel calm and happy. As she worked, Rosa hummed quietly to herself. It was a habit she had picked up years ago. The melodies just came to her naturally, flowing from her heart like water from a spring. She didn't know where these songs came from, but they made the long hours of cleaning pass by quickly. Tonight was different, though. As Rosa pushed her mop across the lobby floor, she heard something that made her stop and listen. It was coming from the main concert hall. Someone was playing the piano, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Rosa knew she shouldn't leave her work, but the music was calling to her. She quietly pushed open the doors to the concert hall and peeked inside. The stage was lit with a single spotlight, and there at the grand piano sat a young woman with blonde hair. Her fingers danced across the keys like she was casting a spell. Rosa had heard this piece before during the concerts. She cleaned around, but she had never heard it played like this. The music seemed to tell a story of love and loss, of dreams and heartbreak. Rosa found herself holding her breath, afraid that even the smallest sound might break the magic. When the music stopped, Rosa quickly stepped back into the shadows. She watched as the young woman gathered her sheet music and left the stage. Rosa waited until she heard the stage door close before she dared to move, but something had changed inside Rosa that night. The music had awakened something in her that had been sleeping for a very long time. As she continued her cleaning, she found herself humming the same melody she had just heard. But it wasn't just humming anymore. She could feel the notes in her bones, could see them dancing in her mind. Rosa had always loved music, but she had never thought of herself as musical. She was just a cleaning lady. She didn't have fancy training or expensive lessons. She didn't even own a piano. But as she worked that night, she felt a pull toward the stage that she had never felt before. Over the next few weeks, Rosa found herself staying a little longer in the concert hall during her shifts. She would sit in the back row and listen to the musicians practice during their late-night rehearsals. She started to notice patterns in the music, the way certain notes seemed to belong together, the way the melody would rise and fall like the waves of the ocean. Rosa began to teach herself about music without even realizing it. She would pick up sheet music that the musicians left behind and study it like it was a treasure map. At first, the little black dots on the page made no sense to her. But slowly, very slowly, she started to understand that each dot represented a sound, and when you put all the sounds together, they made music. She learned that the 5 lines were called a staff, and that the weird squiggly symbol at the beginning was called a clef. She learned that some notes were held longer than others, and that silence was just as important as sound. It was like learning a new language, but it was a language that spoke directly to her heart. Rosa's favorite time was when the hall was completely empty. After all the musicians had gone home and all the audience members had left, she would finish her cleaning and then sit in the front row of the concert hall. She would look up at the stage and imagine what it would feel like to sit at that beautiful grand piano. The piano was a magnificent instrument. Its black surface was so shiny that Rosa could see her reflection in it when she dusted it. The keys were made of real ivory, smooth and cool to the touch. Rosa would run her cloth over each key carefully, wondering what kind of magic lived inside this wooden box. Sometimes, when she was sure no one was around, Rosa would press one of the keys very gently. The sound that came out was pure and clear, like a bell ringing in the distance. She would quickly look around to make sure no one had heard her, but the hall was always empty and quiet. Rosa knew she was just dreaming. People like her didn't play pianos in fancy concert halls. People like her cleaned floors and emptied trash cans and went home to small apartments where the walls were thin and the neighbors were loud. But still, she couldn't stop herself from dreaming. As the months passed, Rosa's love for music grew stronger. She started listening to classical music on her old radio at home. She would sit in her tiny kitchen, eating her simple dinner, and let the music wash over her like a warm bath. She learned the names of the great composers Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Bach. Their names became like old friends to her. Rosa also started to notice things about the musicians who played in the hall. She saw how they held their instruments, how they moved their bodies with the music, how they seemed to disappear into the sound they were making. She watched the way the conductor moved his hands, guiding the music like a shepherd guiding his flock, but most of all, Rosa watched the pianists. She studied the way they sat at the bench, the way they curved their fingers over the keys, the way they seemed to know exactly which key to press without even looking. She memorized every movement, every gesture, storing them away in her heart. Like precious jewels, Rosa's life had a routine, and music was becoming a bigger part of it every day. She would wake up in her small apartment, have a simple breakfast, and then spend her day doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. She cleaned houses for wealthy families, helped elderly neighbors with their shopping, and did whatever work she could find to make ends meet. But no matter how tired she was, no matter how hard her day had been, Rosa always looked forward to her evening shift at the symphony hall. It was her sanctuary, her escape from the ordinary world. In that beautiful building, surrounded by music and dreams, Rosa felt like she belonged to something bigger than herself. She had no idea that soon, everything in her quiet, simple life was about to change forever. It was on a cold Tuesday night in November when Rosa first touched the piano keys. She had finished cleaning the entire hall, and the building was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. The stage lights were dimmed, but there was just enough light to see the beautiful black piano sitting there like a sleeping giant. Rosa had been working at the Symphony Hall for almost 16 years now, and in all that time, she had never dared to do what she was thinking about doing. Her hands were shaking as she walked slowly toward the stage. Each step felt like she was walking toward a cliff, knowing she might fall but unable to stop herself. The piano bench was exactly the right height when she sat down. Rosa had watched hundreds of pianists sit on this same bench, but she never imagined how it would feel to be the one sitting there. Her reflection stared back at her from the shiny black surface of the piano. For a moment, she felt like an imposter, like someone who didn't belong in this sacred space. But then Rosa remembered all the melodies that lived in her heart. All those nights of listening, learning, and dreaming had led her to this moment. She placed her rough, work-worn hands on the smooth ivory keys and pressed down gently on middle C. The sound that filled the empty concert hall was magical. It wasn't just a note. It was like opening a door to another world. Rosa felt tears forming in her eyes. She had never heard anything so beautiful, and she had made that sound with her own hands. Over the next few weeks, Rosa's secret piano sessions became the most important part of her day. She would rush through her cleaning duties, making sure every corner was perfect, just so she could have those precious minutes alone with the piano. At first, she could only play simple melodies with one finger, picking out tunes she remembered from her childhood, but Rosa was a fast learner. She started staying an extra hour after her shift ended, telling herself she was just double-checking her work. In reality, she was teaching herself to play piano using the sheet music left behind by the professional musicians. The first piece she learned to play with both hands was a simple folk song. It took her 3 weeks to master it, practicing the same 8 measures over and over until her fingers could move without her having to think about it. When she finally played it all the way through without mistakes, Rosa felt like she had climbed a mountain. Rosa's method of learning was unusual but effective. During the day, when musicians came for rehearsals, she would watch them from the back of the hall while pretending to dust the same chair for 20 minutes. She studied their hand positions, the way they sat, how they moved their fingers. She memorized everything. At night, she would try to copy what she had seen. Rosa discovered that her hands, despite being rough from years of cleaning, were surprisingly agile on the keys. Her fingers seemed to know instinctively where to go, as if they had been waiting their whole lives for this moment. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday night in December. Rosa had been working on a piece by Mozart for weeks, struggling with a particularly difficult passage. She had heard the symphony's principal pianist play it during rehearsal that afternoon, and something about the way he played it finally made sense to her that night. When Rosa sat down at the piano, the difficult passage flowed from her fingers. Like water, she didn't just play the notes. She felt the emotion behind them. The music seemed to pour out of her heart and through her hands onto the keys. For the first time in her life, Rosa understood what it meant to truly make music. From that night forward, Rosa's playing improved at an incredible rate. She tackled more challenging pieces, working her way through books of classical music that the orchestra members had left behind. Chopin nocturnes, Bach inventions, Beethoven sonatas, each piece taught her something new about music and about herself. Rosa learned to read music the way other people learn to read books. She would take sheet music home to her small apartment and study it like homework. She learned about key signatures and time signatures, about crescendos and diminuendos, about all the little markings that told a story beyond just the notes. Her neighbors sometimes heard piano music coming from her apartment and wondered when Rosa had bought a piano. They didn't know that she was practicing on a small electronic keyboard she had found at a garage sale for $20. It wasn't much, but it was enough for her to practice finger exercises and work on difficult passages when she couldn't get to the symphony hall. Rosa's whole life began to revolve around music. During her day jobs cleaning houses, she would hum the pieces she was learning. While riding the bus to work, she would tap out rhythms on her knee. Even her dreams were filled with music, beautiful melodies that she would try to remember when she woke up. The transformation in Rosa was remarkable, though she didn't realize it herself. Her posture improved from sitting properly at the piano bench. Her confidence grew with each piece she mastered. Even her speaking voice became more musical, rising and falling with natural rhythm. But Rosa kept her secret carefully hidden. She never told her neighbors, her family, or anyone else about her nighttime piano sessions. This wasn't because she was ashamed. It was because the music felt too precious, too personal to share. It was hers alone, and she wanted to protect it. There were close calls, of course. One night, a security guard making his rounds heard piano music coming from the concert hall. Rosa barely had time to hide behind the stage curtains before he came in to investigate. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he would hear it, but he assumed the music was coming from outside and left without searching further. Another time, the janitor who worked the morning shift commented that the piano bench seemed to be in a different position than usual. Rosa had forgotten to put it back exactly where she found it. After that, she made sure to memorize the exact position of everything she touched. As winter turned to spring, Rosa's repertoire grew to include some of the most challenging pieces in classical music. She could play Chopin's most complex nocturnes with feeling and precision. She mastered Bach fugues that made professional pianists struggle. Her fingers flew across the keys with grace and confidence that came from months of dedicated practice, but perhaps most importantly, Rosa had developed her own musical voice. While she could play the pieces exactly as written, she also began to interpret them in her own way. She brought her life experiences to the music, the sadness of being alone, the joy of discovering her talent, the hope for something better. Rosa's secret passion had become the most real thing in her life. During the day, she was still just a cleaning lady, invisible to most people. But at night, in the empty concert hall with just her and the piano, she became someone else entirely. She became a musician. She had no idea that soon her carefully guarded secret would be discovered in the most dramatic way possible, changing her life forever. The night everything changed started like any other Tuesday evening in March. Rosa had finished her cleaning routine and was looking forward to her secret piano practice. She had been working on Chopin's Ballade No. 1 for 3 weeks now, and tonight she felt ready to play it all the way through. Without stopping, the piece was one of the most difficult she had ever attempted. It told a story of love and loss, of dreams that soared high before crashing down to earth. Rosa felt a deep connection to this music. In many ways, it reminded her of her own life, full of quiet hopes and hidden dreams. As Rosa walked toward the stage, she noticed that someone had left the stage lights on. This was unusual, but she didn't think much of it. Sometimes the maintenance crew forgot to turn things off. She was grateful for the extra light as she settled onto the piano bench and placed her fingers on the keys. Rosa began to play, and immediately she felt that magical connection between her heart and the music. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence she had built through months of practice. The melody flowed from the piano like a river, sometimes gentle and peaceful, sometimes wild and dramatic. She was completely lost in the music. Rosa's eyes were closed, and she could feel every note in her soul. This was what she lived for now, these precious moments when she wasn't just a cleaning lady, but a real musician creating something beautiful. The first section of the ballade was soft and romantic, like a love song whispered in the moonlight. Rosa played it with such tenderness that even she was moved by the sound. Then came the more dramatic middle section, where the music became stormy and passionate. Her hands flew across the keys, playing passages that would challenge even trained pianists. Rosa was so absorbed in her playing that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching from backstage. She didn't notice the tall figure standing in the wings, watching her with growing amazement. All she knew was the music flowing through her fingers and filling the empty concert hall with beauty. As she reached the final, triumphant section of the piece, Rosa played with such power and emotion that tears were streaming down her face. This music spoke to something deep inside her, something that had been waiting her whole life to be expressed. When the last note faded away, Rosa sat still for a moment, overwhelmed by what she had just played. She had never played the piece so well before. It felt like she had finally found her true voice. Then she heard the slow clapping. Rosa's blood turned to ice. She spun around on the piano bench and saw a tall man with silver hair standing at the edge of the stage. He was wearing an expensive black suit and had the kind of presence that commanded attention. Rosa knew immediately who he was, Maestro Victor Petrov, the famous conductor of the symphony orchestra. Maestro Petrov was a legend in the classical music world. He had conducted orchestras in Vienna, London, and New York. Musicians traveled from around the world just to work with him. He was known for his brilliant interpretations of classical music, but also for his sharp tongue and demanding personality. Rosa's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She quickly stood up from the piano bench, her hands shaking. She had been caught red-handed, and she knew there would be consequences. "I'm sorry, sir," Rosa stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I was finishing my cleaning and I didn't mean any harm." Maestro Petrov walked slowly toward the piano, his expensive shoes clicking on the wooden stage floor. His eyes were cold and calculating as he looked Rosa up and down. He took in her simple cleaning uniform, her worn shoes, her hands that were still rough despite months of piano playing. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked, his voice carrying a thick European accent. Rosa's mouth was dry. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Finally, she managed to whisper, "A few months, sir." The maestro walked around the piano, running his finger along its polished surface. "A few months," he repeated slowly. "And you think that gives you the right to touch this instrument? Do you have any idea how much this piano costs? How much this entire hall costs to maintain?" Rosa felt smaller with each word he spoke. "I'm sorry, sir. I never meant to Where did you learn to play like that? Maestro Petrov interrupted. Rosa looked down at her feet. I taught myself, sir. I listened to the rehearsals and I found some sheet music and... Maestro Petrov's laugh was cold and harsh. It echoed through the empty concert hall like broken glass. You taught yourself? You think music is something you can just pick up like learning to mop floors? The comparison stung, but Rosa remained silent. She had learned long ago that it was better to stay quiet when people were angry with her. Do you know who I am? The maestro continued, his voice growing louder. I have spent 40 years studying music. I have degrees from the finest conservatories in Europe. I have conducted orchestras that kings and presidents have attended. And you think you can just waltz in here with your cleaning supplies and play Chopin? Rosa felt tears building in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had her dignity. Even in this terrible moment, Maestro Petrov moved closer to her, his eyes flashing with anger and something else, maybe embarrassment that someone he considered beneath him could play so beautifully. Look at you, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. Look at your hands, look at your clothes. You clean toilets and mop floors. You empty trash cans. And you think that qualifies you too? Touch a concert grand piano? You think you understand music? Each word hit Rosa like a physical blow. She had known this moment might come, but she had never imagined it would hurt so much. All those months of joy and discovery, all those nights of finding herself through music, were being torn apart by this man's cruel words. Music is not for people like you, Maestro Petrov continued relentlessly. Music requires education, refinement, breeding. It requires years of proper training, not listening to rehearsals while you push a mop around. Rosa finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. I meant no disrespect, sir. I love music. I just wanted to... Love? Maestro Petrov's voice rose to a shout. You think love is enough? You think because you can stumble through a few notes that makes you a musician? I have seen real musicians, real artists. They sacrifice everything for their craft. They dedicate their lives to perfection. And you think you can achieve the same thing by sneaking around after hours like a a thief? The word thief hung in the air like a curse. Rosa felt something break inside her chest. She wasn't a thief. She had never taken anything that didn't belong to her. All she had done was touch some piano keys and try to make something beautiful. Get out, Maestro Petrov said finally, his voice now quiet but more threatening than when he had been shouting. Get out of here and don't let me ever catch you near this piano again. If I see you anywhere near the stage, you'll lose your job. Do you understand me? Rosa nodded, unable to speak. She felt like she was drowning in shame and humiliation. All the confidence she had built over months of practice crumbled in an instant as she walked toward the stage exit. Maestro Petrov called after her one more time. And just so we're clear, what you were doing up there, that wasn't music. That was noise. Pretty noise, maybe, but noise all the same. Real music requires a soul that you simply don't possess. Rosa made it to the employee break room before the tears finally came. She sat on a folding chair in the dark, sobbing silently so no one would hear her. The maestro's words echoed in her mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. That night, Rosa finished her cleaning duties in silence. She avoided looking at the stage, avoided even thinking about the piano that had brought her so much joy. When she finally left the symphony hall, she felt like she was leaving a part of herself behind. But Rosa had no idea that this cruel encounter was just the beginning. The maestro's humiliation was about to become much more public and much more painful. The next morning, Rosa arrived at work hoping that maybe Maestro Petrov would forget about what had happened. Maybe he would be too busy with his important conductor duties to think about a simple cleaning lady who had touched his precious piano. But Rosa's hopes were crushed within the first hour of her shift. As she was emptying trash cans in the orchestra's rehearsal room, she heard Maestro Petrov's voice booming from the hallway. He was talking to someone, and Rosa's heart sank when she realized he was talking about her. You won't believe what I discovered last night, the maestro was saying to David, the symphony's general manager. I caught our cleaning woman playing piano on the stage. Can you imagine the audacity of it? Rosa froze behind the door, her hands gripping the trash bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to run, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. She was butchering Chopin, Maestro Petrov continued with a laugh that made Rosa's stomach twist. Sitting there in her cleaning uniform, thinking she was some kind of artist, it was almost sad, really. Like watching a child play dress up in their mother's clothes. David's voice was quieter, harder to hear, but Rosa caught enough words to understand that he was asking if there would be any consequences for her. Oh, I think public embarrassment will be punishment enough, the maestro replied. After all, people need to know their place in the world, don't they? Rosa quietly slipped out of the room through another door, but the damage was already done. The story had begun to spread, and there was no stopping it now. By lunchtime, it seemed like everyone who worked at the symphony hall had heard about Rosa's midnight piano playing. The story grew with each telling, becoming more ridiculous and more humiliating with every version. Antonio, the head of building maintenance, pulled Rosa aside during her break. He was a kind man who had always treated her with respect, but even he seemed uncomfortable. Rosa, is it true what they're saying? About you playing piano on the stage? Rosa looked down at her hands. Yes, it's true. Antonio shook his head sadly. You know you can't do things like that, right? That piano costs more money than we'll make in our lifetime. If something happened to it... I was careful, Rosa said quietly. I would never hurt anything in this place. I love this hall. I know you do, Antonio said gently. But Rosa, have to understand how it looks. The maestro is very upset. He's been telling everyone who'll listen about what happened. As the days passed, the humiliation only got worse. Maestro Petrov seemed to take special pleasure in making Rosa the subject of his jokes and comments. During rehearsal breaks, when musicians gathered around for coffee, he would tell the story of the cleaning lady who thought she was Chopin. She was sitting there, he would say, miming exaggerated hand movements, playing away like she was. Performing at Carnegie Hall, her technique was all wrong, of course. No training, no understanding of the music's true meaning, just noise, really, loud, clumsy noise. The musicians would laugh politely, though some looked uncomfortable. A few of the younger orchestra members seemed to think the maestro was being unnecessarily cruel, but none of them dared to speak up against him. Maestro Petrov's reputation and power in the classical music world made him untouchable. Rosa tried to do her job and ignore the whispers and stares, but it was impossible. Every time she entered a room, conversations would stop. People would look at her and then look away quickly, as if they were embarrassed for her. The worst part was when important visitors came to the hall. Maestro Petrov had a habit of giving tours to wealthy donors, famous musicians, and music critics. During these tours, he would always make sure to point Rosa out if she happened to be working nearby. Ah, there she is, he would say with a theatrical wave of his hand, our resident pianist. Perhaps you'd like to hear her interpretation of Rachmaninoff? The visitors would laugh, thinking it was just harmless humor, but Rosa felt each joke like a knife in her heart. One particularly bad day, a famous piano soloist was visiting the hall to discuss an upcoming performance. Rosa was cleaning the lobby when she heard Maestro Petrov's voice carrying across the space. You see that woman over there with the mop? He was saying to the visiting pianist. She fancies herself quite the musician. I found her butchering classical music on our concert grand last week. She actually thought she could play Chopin. Can you imagine? The visiting pianist looked uncomfortable. Well, I suppose everyone has to start somewhere. Start? Maestro Petrov's voice rose incredulously. My dear fellow, there is no starting point for someone like that. Music isn't something you can just pick up like learning to clean windows. It requires breeding, education, years of proper training. Some people simply aren't meant for higher things. Rosa felt her face burning with shame. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never come back. But she had bills to pay and nowhere else to go. This job was all she had. The humiliation extended beyond just the maestro's comments. Other staff members began treating Rosa differently too. Some were sympathetic, like Carla from the box office, who would smile sadly at Rosa and sometimes slip her an extra sandwich from the volunteer appreciation lunches, but others seemed to enjoy having someone to look down on. The assistant conductor's secretary, Patricia, would make snide comments about people who don't know their place. The head usher, an older woman named Agnes, would shake her head disapprovingly whenever Rosa walked by. In my day, Agnes told anyone who would listen, people understood boundaries. They knew what was appropriate and what wasn't. This is what happens when society breaks down. The worst moment came during a board meeting that Rosa was cleaning around. The symphonies. Board of Directors was discussing the upcoming season, and somehow the conversation turned to Rosa's piano playing incident. "We need to make sure our staff understands appropriate behavior," said Mrs. Wellington, the board chairwoman. "We can't have our cleaning people thinking they can just play around with expensive instruments." Perhaps we need better security," suggested another board member. "Or more supervision of the maintenance staff." Maestro Petrov, who was attending the meeting, saw this as another opportunity to tell his story. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me assure you that the situation has been handled. Our cleaning woman has been properly educated about her role here. I don't think we'll have any more problems with unauthorized concerts." The board members chuckled at his joke, but Rosa, who was emptying wastebaskets nearby, felt like she was being crushed under the weight of their laughter. Even Rosa's family began to hear about what had happened. Her sister Linda called her one evening, having heard gossip from a friend whose cousin worked at the symphony hall. "Rosa, what's this I'm hearing about you getting in trouble at work? Something about playing piano?" Rosa tried to explain, but it was hard to make her sister understand why she had risked her job for music. Linda meant well, but she lived in a practical world where dreams didn't pay the bills. "You need to keep your head down and do your job," Linda advised. "Don't give them any more reasons to talk about you. Just clean and go home." But the hardest part for Rosa wasn't the public humiliation or the gossip or even the cruel jokes. The hardest part was that she had lost her music. She no longer dared to go near the piano, even during her late-night shifts when the hall was empty. The joy that had filled her life for months was gone, replaced by shame and fear. Rosa would walk past the concert hall during her cleaning rounds, but she couldn't bring herself to look at the stage. The piano that had once been her friend now felt like a reminder of her foolishness. Every time she dusted around the stage area, she could hear Maestro Petrov's voice in her head. "People like you simply aren't meant for higher things." As the weeks passed, Rosa began to believe those words. Maybe the maestro was right. Maybe she had been foolish to think she could be anything more than a cleaning lady. Maybe some dreams were just too big for people like her, but deep inside, buried under all the shame and humiliation, a small spark of music still burned in Rosa's heart. And that spark was about to become very important. 3 months had passed since the night that changed everything for Rosa. The humiliation had become a constant weight on her shoulders, but she had learned to carry it quietly. She did her job, kept her head down, and tried to forget that she had ever dreamed of making music. It was a Saturday evening in June, and the symphony hall was buzzing with more activity than Rosa had ever seen. Tonight was the annual summer gala, the most important fundraising event of the year. Wealthy donors from across the state had come to hear a special performance and write big checks to support the orchestra. Rosa had been working extra hours all week to prepare for this event. Every surface in the building had been polished until it gleamed. The red carpet had been rolled out at the main entrance. Fresh flowers decorated every corner. Even the bathrooms sparkled like jewelry stores. The centerpiece of tonight's gala was supposed to be a performance of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most beautiful and challenging pieces ever written for piano and orchestra. The soloist was Alexander Volkov, a world-famous pianist who had flown in from Moscow specifically for this performance. Rosa knew this piece well. She had heard it countless times during rehearsals over the years, and it was one of the works She had secretly taught herself to play during her midnight practice sessions. The music told a story of struggle and triumph that had always spoken to her heart. As evening approached, Rosa could feel the excitement building throughout the hall. Board members in expensive evening gowns and tuxedos were arriving early for the pre-concert reception. The musicians were warming up backstage, and Maestro Petrov was in his element, greeting important guests and making sure everything was perfect. Rosa was in the employee break room, changing into a fresh uniform for the evening shift, when she heard rapid footsteps running down the hallway. David, the general manager, burst through the door looking panicked. "Has anyone seen Dr. Martinez?" he asked breathlessly, referring to the symphony's doctor who was always on call during important events. "What's wrong?" asked Tony, one of the security guards. "Alexander Volkov is sick," David said, running his hands through his hair. "Food poisoning. He can barely stand up, let alone play piano. Dr. Martinez is with him now, but there's no way. He can perform tonight." Rosa felt her stomach drop. She knew how important this concert was for the symphony. Months of planning, thousands of dollars in expenses, and hundreds of wealthy donors all expecting to hear one of the world's greatest pianists perform. David was already on his phone, frantically calling every pianist he could think of. Rosa could hear him leaving desperate voicemails as she finished getting ready for work. "Maria? It's David Chun from the symphony. I know it's last minute, but we have an emergency ... Polk. Pause. Oh, you're in Europe, of course. Click, Roberto. Think. God, you answered. We need a pianist who can play Rachmaninoff 2 tonight. Pause. Your hand is in a cast? Right, I heard about the accident. Sorry to bother you. Click. The calls continued, each one ending in disappointment. Local pianists were either traveling, injured, or simply not skilled enough to handle such. A demanding piece on no notice. As the minutes ticked by, David's voice became more desperate. Rosa quietly left the break room and began her evening duties. But she couldn't stop thinking about the crisis unfolding around her. She knew that if they couldn't find a replacement pianist, the entire gala would be ruined. The symphony would lose hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations, and Maestro Petrov would be humiliated in front of the most important people in the classical music world. As she cleaned the lobby, Rosa watched through the windows as more and more guests arrived. They had no idea that disaster was waiting inside. Women in glittering evening gowns laughed with men in perfect tuxedos, all of them excited for a magical evening of music. An hour before the concert was supposed to begin, Rosa saw Maestro Petrov storming through the hallway, his face red with anger and panic. He was shouting into his phone in what sounded like German, probably calling contacts in Europe to see if anyone could catch a last-minute flight. "This is impossible." She heard him yell to David, "Do you understand what this means? The board will have my head. Mrs. Wellington has been looking forward to this concert for months." David looked exhausted from making calls. "Maestro, I've contacted every professional pianist within a 500-mile radius. Nobody is available who can handle this piece." "Then find someone who can," Maestro Petrov snapped. "I don't care if you have to drag them out of their house. We cannot cancel this performance." Rosa continued working, trying to stay invisible while the crisis swirled around her. She felt terrible for everyone involved, but especially for the musicians who had been practicing for weeks to perform with Alexander Volkov 30 minutes before showtime. The situation was becoming desperate. Rosa could see Maestro Petrov through the glass doors of the administrative office, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. David was still making phone calls, but his voice had lost all hope. Some of the donors were starting to notice that something was wrong. Rosa overheard conversations where people were asking why the pre-concert talk had been canceled, and why the maestro looked so stressed. It was then that Rosa noticed Luna Shun, the assistant conductor, sitting alone in one of the practice rooms. Luna was young, probably in her early 30s, and had always been kind to Rosa. Unlike the maestro, she treated all the employees with respect and often said good morning. When she saw Rosa working, Luna looked troubled as she stared at a score of the Rachmaninoff concerto. Rosa could see that she was thinking hard about something, but seemed hesitant to act on whatever idea she had. Rosa knocked gently on the practice room door. "Excuse me, Miss Chun? Is everything okay?" Luna looked up with tired eyes. "Oh, hi, Rosa. No, everything is definitely not okay. We're about to have the biggest disaster in the symphony's history." "I heard about Mr. Volkov," Rosa said quietly. "I'm sorry, I know how much work everyone put into tonight." Luna sighed deeply. "The thing is, Rosa, I know someone who could play this piece, someone who could probably play it beautifully. But double quotes, she trailed off, looking uncertain. But what?" Rosa asked. Luna studied Rosa's face for a long moment, as if trying to make a difficult decision. "Rosa, can I ask you something? That night when Maestro Petrov found you playing piano, how much of the Chopin Ballade did you actually know?" Rosa felt her face flush red. She had hoped people had forgotten about that embarrassing incident. I knew the whole piece, Miss Chun. The whole thing? All 15 minutes of it?" Rosa nodded, not trusting her voice. Luna leaned forward in her chair. "Rosa, I heard you playing that night. I was in the building late, working on score analysis, and I heard the most beautiful piano music coming from the concert hall. I thought Alexander Volkov had arrived early to practice." Rosa's eyes widened in surprise. She had thought she was completely alone that night. "When I realized it was you," Luna continued, "I was amazed. Not just by your technical skill, but by the musicality, the emotion you brought to the piece. It was ... it was extraordinary." Rosa didn't know what to say. After months of being told she was foolish and untalented, hearing these words felt like a miracle. Luna stood up suddenly, as if she had made a decision. "Rosa, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Do you know Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto?" Rosa's heart started beating faster. "Yes, Miss Chun, I know it." "How well do you know it?" Rosa took a deep breath. "I know every note. I've been listening to it for years, and I taught myself to play it." Luna's eyes lit up with something that looked like hope. "All 3 movements?" "Yes, ma'am." Luna grabbed Rosa's hands, not caring that they were rough from cleaning work. "Rosa, I know this is going to sound crazy, but would you be willing to play tonight? In front of all those people?" Rosa felt the world spinning around her. The very idea was terrifying and impossible and wonderful all at the same time. "Monsieur Chun, I don't think Maestro Petrov would—" "Let me worry about Maestro Petrov," Luna said firmly. "Right now, you might be the only person who can save this concert. Will you do it?" Rosa looked into Luna's hopeful eyes and felt something awakening in her chest. It was the same feeling she used to get when she sat down at the piano during those magical midnight hours. It was the music calling to her again. "Yes," Rosa whispered. "I'll do it." The words hung in the air between Rosa and Luna like a bridge that could either save them or send them both falling into disaster. Rosa had said yes, but now the reality of what that meant was hitting her like a cold wave. "I'll do it," she had whispered, but her voice was shaking so badly she could barely get the words out. Luna's face showed relief and terror at the same time. She knew Rosa could play beautifully, but asking a cleaning lady to perform in front of 500 wealthy donors and music critics was either the bravest thing she had ever done or the most foolish. "Okay," Luna said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "First, we need to tell David, then we have to convince Maestro Petrov." Just speaking the maestro's name made Rosa's stomach twist into knots. She could still hear his cruel words from 3 months ago, still feel the burning shame of his public humiliation. The idea of facing him again, especially with this impossible request, made her want to run and hide, but Rosa thought about all the musicians who had practiced so hard for tonight. She thought about the symphony staff who had worked extra hours to make everything perfect. She thought about the people who had traveled from far away just to hear this concert. Maybe, just maybe, she could help save something beautiful instead of being the person who ruined it. Luna led Rosa through the hallways toward the administrative offices. Rosa had never walked through these corridors as anything other than a cleaning lady, and now she was walking toward a conversation that would either change her life or destroy what little was left of her reputation. They found David in his office, slumped over his desk with his head in his hands. His phone was surrounded by crumpled papers covered with crossed-out names and phone numbers. He looked like a man who had run out of miracles. "David," Luna said quietly, "I think I found our pianist." David looked up with exhausted eyes. "Luna, unless you've got someone hiding in your back pocket, we're finished. I've called everyone. There's nobody." "Actually," Luna said, glancing at Rosa, "there is someone. She's been here the whole time." David followed Luna's gaze and saw Rosa standing nervously in the doorway. His expression went from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like panic. "Luna, please tell me you're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting." "Rosa knows the Rachmaninoff concerto," Luna said firmly. "She knows it well. I've heard her play, David. She's extraordinary." David rubbed his temples like he was getting a massive headache. "Luna, do you understand what you're asking? This isn't a small recital in someone's living room. This is our biggest fundraiser of the year. The board of directors will be there. Music critics from 3 different newspapers will be there. And you want to put our cleaning lady on stage?" Rosa felt each word like a small stab to her heart, but she also understood David's position. From his perspective, this idea was completely insane. "I know how it sounds," Luna said. "But David, what choice do we have? It's either Rosa or we cancel the concert. What do you think will hurt the symphony's reputation more, taking a chance on someone with real talent, or disappointing 500 people who paid $200 a ticket?" David looked back and forth between Luna and Rosa could see him trying to calculate which disaster would be smaller. Finally, he sighed deeply. "Even if I agreed to this crazy plan, Maestro Petrov will never go for it. Never. Especially not with—" He gestured vaguely at Rosa, not wanting to say what they all knew, that the Maestro had publicly humiliated her just months ago. "Let me handle Maestro Petrov," Luna said with more confidence than Rosa thought anyone should have when talking about facing that formidable man. "Luna," David said seriously, "if this goes wrong, it's not just Rosa who will suffer. Your career could be over too. Are you sure you want to risk that?" Luna looked at Rosa, who was standing quietly by the door, her hands clasped together to stop them from shaking. "Rosa, are you absolutely certain you can do this? Can you play that concerto in front of all those people?" Rosa thought about all those nights she had played alone on the stage, pouring her heart into the music when no one was watching. She thought about how the Rachmaninoff concerto had become like an old friend to her, every note and phrase as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Yes," Rosa said, and this time her voice was steadier. "I can do it." David looked like a man about to jump off a cliff, but he nodded slowly. "Okay, let's go find Maestro Petrov. But Luna, you do the talking." They found the Maestro in the green room backstage, pacing like a caged tiger. His usually perfect hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, and his formal concert attire looked wrinkled from stress. When he saw the 3 of them approaching, his face showed a flicker of hope. "Please tell me you found someone," he said desperately. "Mrs. Wellington has been asking questions, and I'm running out of excuses." Luna took a deep breath. "Maestro, we have found a pianist who knows the Rachmaninoff concerto and can perform it tonight." Maestro Petrov's whole body seemed to relax. "Thank God. Who is it? Where are they? Do they need time to warm up?" "She's right here," Luna said, stepping aside so the Maestro could see Rosa clearly. The change in Maestro Petrov's expression was immediate and dramatic. Relief turned to confusion, then to disbelief, and finally to a rage so intense that Rosa took a step backward. "This is a joke," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're making a joke at the worst possible moment. Maestro, I'm completely serious," Luna said calmly. "Rosa knows this piece. She can save tonight's concert." "Her?" Maestro Petrov's voice rose to a shout. "The cleaning woman? The same cleaning woman I caught making noise on my piano 3 months ago? You want me to put her on stage in front of the most important audience of the year?" Rosa felt like she was shrinking under his glare, but Luna stepped protectively in front of her. "Maestro, I heard Rosa play that night. She wasn't making noise. She was making music. Beautiful, professional-level music. "You're both insane," the maestro said, shaking his head violently. "I will not destroy my reputation by putting an amateur on that stage. I would rather cancel the concert." "And lose $500,000 in donations?" David asked quietly. Maestro Petrov froze. He knew David was right. Canceling the concert would be a financial disaster for the symphony, and the board would hold him personally responsible. "There has to be another option," he said desperately. "What about recorded music? We could tell the audience that the soloist is performing via video link from Moscow." "Maestro," Luna said gently, "Mrs. Wellington specifically came to hear live piano. She donated an extra $50,000 just for tonight's performance. If we try to fake it with recordings, she know immediately." Rosa watched this conversation happening around her, feeling like she was in a strange dream. 3 months ago, this same man had told her she would never understand real music. Now he was being asked to trust her with the most important performance of his career. Finally, Maestro Petrov turned to look directly at Rosa. His eyes were cold and calculating, like he was trying to see into her soul. "You," he said, "you really think you can play Rachmaninoff in front of 500 people? Without making a fool of yourself and everyone who trusted you?" Rosa met his gaze and felt something strong awakening inside her chest. It was the same feeling she had when she played piano alone at night, a quiet confidence that came from knowing she belonged with the music. "Yes, sir," she said clearly, "I can do it." Maestro Petrov stared at her for a long moment. Rosa could see him weighing his options, calculating risks, trying to decide between certain disaster and possible disaster. "If you fail," he said finally, "if you embarrass me in front of those people, I will make sure you never work in this city again. Do you understand?" "I understand," Rosa said. The maestro looked around at Luna, David, and Rosa, 3 people asking him to make the most difficult decision of his professional life. "Fine," he said, the word coming out like he was spitting something bitter. "But she performs in her uniform." "I won't pretend she's something she's not." Rosa felt her heart sink. She had hoped that maybe, just maybe, she could look like she belonged on that stage. But the maestro was making sure everyone would know exactly what she was, a cleaning lady who had stepped out of her place. "She need a dress," Luna said firmly. "Something appropriate for the stage." "Absolutely not," Maestro Petrov snapped. "She performs as she is or not at all." Rosa looked down at her simple cleaning uniform, practical, durable, and completely wrong for a concert stage. But then she thought about all the beautiful music that had flowed through her fingers while wearing these same clothes during her midnight practice sessions. "It's okay," Rosa said quietly. "I'll wear what I have. The music is what matters." Luna looked like she wanted to argue, but Rosa shook her head. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let pride stop her now. 20 minutes until curtain, David said, checking his watch. "Rosa, do you need time to warm up?" Rosa's hands were trembling again, but not from fear this time. It was anticipation, like her fingers were already reaching for the piano keys. "Yes," she said. "I'd like a few minutes with the piano." As they walked toward the stage, Rosa could hear the audience settling into their seats on the other side of the curtain. In just a few minutes, she would walk out there and either fulfill the dream she had carried in her heart for months, or fail so spectacularly that Rosa stood alone on the empty stage, facing the grand piano that had once been her secret friend, and then her source of shame. The concert hall was quiet except for the muffled sounds of 500 people settling into their seats. On the other side of the heavy red curtain, her hands were shaking as she approached the piano bench. This was the same instrument she had played countless times during her midnight practice sessions, but everything felt different now. In just a few minutes, she would be performing in front of the most important audience of her life. Wearing her simple cleaning uniform while they sat in evening gowns and tuxedos, Rosa sat down at the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. She played a few gentle scales and immediately felt some of her nervousness melt away. The piano still sounded like home. The keys still responded to her touch the same way they always had. This was her instrument, and this was her music. Behind her, the orchestra members were filing onto the stage, taking their seats and warming up their instruments. Rosa could feel some of them staring at her, and she heard whispers that she tried not to understand. Most of these musicians had heard about her humiliation 3 months ago. Now they were being asked to perform with the same cleaning lady who had been publicly mocked by their conductor. Luna appeared at Rosa's side, her face calm but her eyes showing the stress she was trying to hide. "How are you feeling?" she asked quietly. "Scared," Rosa admitted, "but ready." "Good," Luna said. "Fear means you care. And Rosa, I want you to know something. No matter what happens out there, you're incredibly brave for doing this." From the wings, Rosa could see Maestro Petrov talking to David, both men looking like they were about to face a firing squad. The maestro kept glancing toward Rosa with an expression that clearly said he expected complete disaster. Antonio, the head of maintenance, had somehow heard about what was happening. He appeared backstage with several other staff members, all of them looking amazed that their quiet colleague was about to perform with the symphony orchestra. "Rosa," Antonio whispered, "we're all rooting for you. Show them what you can do." The support from her fellow workers meant more to Rosa than they would ever know. These were people who understood what it was like to be invisible, to work hard without recognition. If she could do this, maybe it would mean something for all of them. 5 minutes before the performance, Luna gathered the orchestra members for a quick meeting. Rosa listened from the piano bench as Luna explained the situation to the musicians who didn't already know. "I know this is unusual," Luna said, "but Rosa is an extraordinary pianist. I've heard her play, and I guarantee you'll be amazed. I need you all to support her tonight." Most of the musicians nodded professionally, but Rosa could see doubt in many of their faces. She didn't blame them. If someone had told her 3 hours ago that she would be performing with a symphony orchestra, she wouldn't have believed it. The concert hall manager appeared at the edge of the stage. "Places, everyone. We're starting in 2 minutes." Rosa's heart began beating so fast she thought it might explode. She closed her eyes and tried to remember all those peaceful nights when she had played this same piece alone on this same stage. The music had felt so natural then, flowing from her heart through her fingers like water from a spring. Maestro Petrov walked to the center of the stage, and Rosa could see him preparing to face the audience. His usual confidence was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he looked like a man about to deliver terrible news. "Ladies and gentlemen," she heard him say through the curtain, "we have an announcement regarding tonight's performance." The audience grew quiet, sensing that something was wrong. "Unfortunately, our scheduled soloist, Alexander Volkov, has taken ill and cannot perform tonight." Rosa heard disappointed murmurs from the audience. Some people were probably thinking about leaving, wondering if they could get their money back. "However," Maestro Petrov continued, his voice gaining a bit of strength, "we are fortunate to have a replacement pianist who will perform. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the maestro paused, and Rosa could imagine him struggling with his next words. "Please welcome Rosa Martinez." Rosa had never heard her last name announced to an audience before. It sounded strange and important and terrifying all at the same time. The curtain began to rise, and suddenly Rosa could see the audience. Hundreds of faces in the darkness beyond the stage lights, all turned toward her. She saw evening gowns that cost more than she made in a year, jewelry that sparkled like stars, and expressions ranging from curiosity to confusion. Rosa knew what they were thinking. They could see her cleaning uniform, could tell immediately that she wasn't the kind of person who usually graced this stage. Some of them probably recognized her as the woman who emptied their trash cans during intermissions. She walked to the piano, trying to hold her head high despite the whispers she could hear from the audience. Someone in the front row asked their companion, "Who is that? I've never heard of her." Rosa sat down at the piano bench and adjusted it to the right height. Her hands were steady now, which surprised her. All the fear and nervousness seemed to have settled into a calm focus. This was the moment she had been dreaming of, without even knowing she was dreaming of it. Maestro Petrov raised his baton, and the orchestra prepared to begin. Rosa could see doubt in his eyes, but also a tiny flicker of something that might have been hope. His reputation was in her hands now, and they both knew it. The concerto began with the orchestra playing alone, setting the mood with dark, powerful chords that seemed to fill the entire hall. Rosa listened to the familiar music and felt herself relaxing into the moment. She had heard this opening hundreds of times, but tonight it sounded different. Tonight it was leading to her dot when her entrance approached. Rosa placed her hands over the keys and waited for exactly the right moment. She could feel 500 people holding their breath, waiting to discover whether this unknown woman in a cleaning uniform could actually play one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire. The moment arrived, and Rosa began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were soft and gentle, like a whisper of melody floating over the orchestra's powerful foundation. But there was something in Rosa's touch that made even these simple notes sound special. She played with a tenderness that came from years of loving this music in secret. Rosa could feel the audience's attention shifting from skepticism to surprise. These weren't the fumbling notes of an amateur. This was real musicianship, real understanding of what the music was supposed to say. As the first movement developed, Rosa's playing grew more confident and expressive. Her fingers danced across the keys with grace and precision that impressed even the orchestra members who had doubted her. She played the technical passages with ease, but more importantly, she played with emotion that touched something deep in everyone who heard her in the audience. Mrs. Wellington leaned forward in her seat, completely captivated. She had heard this concerto performed by some of the world's greatest pianists, but there was something special about this performance. This woman wasn't just playing the notes. She was telling a story. The first movement built to its dramatic climax, with Rosa's piano singing out over the full orchestra in a moment of pure musical triumph. When it ended, there was a brief silence before scattered applause broke out from the audience, but Rosa barely heard the applause. She was completely absorbed in the music, living inside each phrase and melody. This was what she had been born to do, and finally she was doing it. The second movement began, slow and beautiful, like a prayer. Rosa played it with such tenderness that some people in the audience felt tears forming in their eyes. This was music that spoke directly to the heart, played by someone who understood suffering and hope and the power of dreams. As Rosa played, she forgot about her uniform, forgot about Maestro Petrov's cruel words, forgot about everything except the conversation between her piano and the orchestra. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The final movement was approaching, and Rosa knew that soon this magical moment would be over. But for now, she was flying. The final movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 is like a musical hurricane. It starts with energy that builds and builds until it becomes an unstoppable force of pure emotion. As Rosa's fingers prepared to launch into this magnificent finale, she felt completely connected to every note that was about to pour from the piano. The audience had been won over during the first two movements, but nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. Rosa began the final movement with a power and confidence that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. Her hands moved across the keys like they were painting a masterpiece, each note perfectly placed and filled with meaning. The orchestra followed her lead, and together they created music that filled every corner of the concert hall. Rosa played passages that would challenge professional pianists who had studied for decades, but she made them sound effortless. More than that, she made them sound inevitable, like this was the only way this music could possibly be played. In the audience, people were sitting on the edge of their seats. Mrs. Wellington, the wealthy patron who had donated extra money specifically for tonight's performance, was gripping her husband's arm so tightly that he winced. She had never heard anything like this. The woman on stage wasn't just playing music. She was channeling pure emotion through the piano. Behind Rosa, the orchestra members were experiencing something magical too. Musicians who had been skeptical just an hour ago were now completely caught up in Rosa's interpretation. The violinist swayed with her melodies, the cellist felt the deep emotion in her playing, and even the brass section seemed inspired by her passion. Maestro Petrov, conducting from his podium, was having the strangest experience of his long career. 3 months ago, he had cruelly dismissed this woman as someone who could never understand real music. Now he was watching her create one of the most moving performances he had ever witnessed. His conducting became more expressive as Rosa's. Playing inspired him to reach heights he hadn't touched in years. As the concerto built toward its climax, Rosa felt like she was flying above the stage. Every cell in her body was focused on the music flowing through her. This wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a conversation between her heart and the hearts of everyone listening. She was telling them the story of every dream that had ever been dismissed, every hope that had been crushed, and every moment when someone dared to believe in themselves, despite what others said. The technical demands of the final movement were enormous, but Rosa met every challenge with grace and power. Her fingers raced through passages that sounded like musical lightning, then slowed to moments of such tenderness that people in the audience felt their breath catch in their throats. Antonio, watching from the wings with the other staff members, felt tears streaming down his face. He had worked alongside Rosa for years, seeing her as a quiet, dependable colleague. Now he was witnessing her transformation into something magnificent, and he felt proud to know her. As the concerto rushed toward its final moments, Rosa felt a surge of emotion so powerful it almost overwhelmed her. This was her moment, her chance, to show the world who she really was beneath the cleaning uniform and humble exterior. Every note she played was a declaration. I belong here, I am worthy, I have something beautiful to give. The orchestra was completely with her now, 50 musicians, united in creating something that transcended mere performance. Together, they built the final climax of the concerto into a musical mountain that seemed to touch the sky, and then, suddenly, it was over. The last notes of the piano and orchestra rang out together, powerful and perfect, before fading into silence. For a moment that felt like eternity, the entire concert hall was completely still. Rosa sat at the piano, her hands still touching the keys, barely able to believe what had just happened. The silence stretched on, and Rosa began to worry. Had something gone wrong? Had she made a mistake that she didn't notice? She looked out at the audience, trying to read their faces in the dim light beyond the stage. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the audience, someone started clapping. It was a single person applauding slowly and deliberately, and in the silence of the hall, it sounded like thunder. Within seconds, more people joined in. Then suddenly the entire audience was on their feet, applauding with an intensity that shook the building. The sound was deafening, a wave of appreciation and amazement that washed over the stage like a tsunami. Rosa stood up from the piano bench, overwhelmed by what she was seeing. Hundreds of people in their finest clothes were giving her a standing ovation. These were people who attended concerts all over the world, who had heard the greatest musicians of their generation, and they were applauding her with genuine enthusiasm and respect. Mrs. Wellington was clapping so hard her hands hurt, tears of joy streaming down her face. She turned to her husband and shouted over the applause, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." The applause continued for what felt like forever. Rosa looked back at the orchestra and saw that they were applauding too. These professional musicians, people who had initially doubted her, were now showing their respect for what she had accomplished. Even more amazing to Rosa was seeing Maestro Petrov walking toward her across the stage. His face showed a mixture of emotions, amazement, shame, and something that looked like genuine admiration. When he reached her, he took her hand and raised it high in the air, presenting her to the audience like the star she had just become. The applause grew even louder. People were shouting, "Bravo!" and "Magnificent!" Some audience members were wiping tears from their eyes, moved not just by the beautiful music but by the incredible story they had just witnessed. Luna was crying with joy as she watched from the wings. She had believed in Rosa when no one else would, and now she felt vindicated in the most spectacular way possible. Her career could have been ruined if this had gone badly, but instead, she had helped create one of the most memorable performances in the symphony's history. As the applause finally began to die down, Maestro Petrov stepped forward to address the audience. His voice was humble in a way that people who knew him had never heard before. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, What you have just witnessed is a reminder that musical talent can be found in the most unexpected places. Rosa Martinez has given us a performance that I will remember for the rest of my life. He turned to Rosa, and his next words were spoken loud enough for the entire audience to hear. Rosa, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you, completely and totally wrong. You are a true musician, and it has been an honor to conduct this performance with you. The audience applauded again at this unexpected display of humility from the famously difficult Maestro, but Maestro Petrov wasn't finished. Rosa, I would like to offer you a position as one of our featured pianists. The symphony would be honored to have you perform with us regularly. Rosa could barely believe what she was hearing. 3 months ago, this same man had told her she would never understand real music. Now he was offering her a job as a professional pianist. The audience erupted in applause again, this time celebrating not just Rosa's performance but her incredible journey from cleaning lady to concert pianist. As Rosa stood on the stage, still wearing her simple uniform, surrounded by musicians in formal concert dress and facing an audience of wealthy patrons, she felt something she had never experienced before. She felt like she truly belonged. The little girl inside her who had always dreamed of making music was finally free. The woman who had cleaned these floors for 15 years had discovered that she was capable of so much more than anyone had ever imagined. As the curtain finally fell and the audience began to leave, many of them stayed to talk about what they had just experienced. They knew they had witnessed something special, something that would be talked about for years to come. Rosa's life had changed forever in the span of 30 minutes. She would never again be just a cleaning lady who dreamed of music. She was now Rosa Martinez, pianist, a woman who had proven that talent and dignity can triumph over prejudice and cruelty. And as she finally left the stage that night, Rosa carried with her the knowledge that dreams, no matter how impossible they seem, sometimes really do come true.